This one didn't just borrow Friday the 13th setup, it warped it into something twisted. Sleepaway Camp follows Angela, a quiet girl at a summer camp where people start dying in violent, unpredictable ways. On the surface, it's another slasher with crude humor and practical effects. But beneath that, it's a strange, uncomfortable film about identity and trauma that ends with one of the most shocking reveals in horror history. What made Sleepaway Camp unforgettable was its nerve. It's sleazy, awkward, and unsettling, but it carries an odd intensity the Friday sequels lacked. The kills are wild, boiling water, beehives, curling irons, and the editing keeps you guessing. Its director, Robert Hiltzik, didn't care about logic. He cared about reaction, and audiences reacted. Even today, that final freeze frame is still burned into horror fans' minds. If there's one film that feels like it was built in Jason's shadow, it's The Burning. Released a year after Friday the 13th, it borrowed nearly every ingredient. Teen campers, forested setting, revenge from a burned caretaker. But it turned the heat up with more energy and better gore. The story follows Cropsy, a cruel camp janitor who becomes disfigured after a prank goes wrong. He returns years later with a set of garden shears and a grudge. What makes The Burning stand out is the brutality. The famous raft massacre, done in one sweeping take, is still one of the nastiest sequences in any slasher. Tom Savini, who had worked on Friday the 13th, handled the effects again, and this time, he went all in. The tone is more aggressive, the pacing quicker, and the killer more grounded. There's no supernatural element, just a man consumed by rage. It's rough, cheap, and unforgettable. When Madman came out, it felt like someone had watched Friday the 13th Part 2 and said, "Let's make that." But in one long campfire story. The film centers on a rural legend about Madman Mars, a farmer who slaughtered his family and now stalks anyone foolish enough to speak his name. The idea is thin, but the atmosphere is thick. There's an eerie stillness that hangs over the movie, the kind you get from deep woods and low fog. Where Friday the 13th was sharp and direct, Madman plays like a fever dream. The lighting is blue, the kills are drawn out, and the killer is pure nightmare fuel, an enormous brute swinging an axe with animal fury. It didn't reach wide audiences, but it's grown into a cult hit for a reason. It captures the hypnotic weirdness of early 80s slashers. It feels like a campfire story that escaped into real life. If Friday the 13th was about teenage mistakes, The Mutilator was about adult regret gone rotten. A man accidentally kills his wife while cleaning his gun, and years later, invites his son and friends to his beach house. They're expecting a fun weekend. Instead, the father's grief turns murderous. The film's tone is strange, half goofy, half gruesome, but its violence is extreme. The director, Buddy Cooper, didn't have a big budget, but he used his resources to craft kills that stick, decapitations, hooks, and one infamous scene that made even seasoned fans wince. It feels like Friday the 13th filtered through small-town madness, less polished, more personal. You can feel the director's hands on every frame. This film is often called Friday the 13th's meaner cousin. Directed by Joseph Zito and featuring effects by Tom Savini again, The Prowler follows a killer in military gear returning to punish college kids during a graduation dance. The kills are ruthless. Bayonets through skulls, pitchforks through torsos, and every shot feels wet, heavy, and deliberate. Unlike Friday the 13th, this movie gives the killer an identity early on and builds everything around that sense of returning trauma. The pacing is tight, the mood is grim, and the suspense scenes are handled with skill. If Friday gave slashers their playground, The Prowler taught them how to shoot pain. It's one of the few films from that era that still feels genuinely mean. This one takes the survival aspect of Friday the 13th and blends it with a wilderness thriller. A group of forest rangers on a camping trip find themselves hunted by someone who knows the terrain better than they do. There's less focus on blood and more on fear of the unknown. The killer hides, waits, and strikes when they're lost and separated. It's worth noting the cast. Young Daryl Hannah and Joe Pantoliano appear early in their careers. But what really sells it is the realism. The forest feels vast, and the group's panic feels earned. It plays more like a hunt than a slaughter. The killer isn't supernatural or flashy, just a ghost of the woods that doesn't want intruders. Friday the 13th taught audiences to fear campgrounds. The final terror made them fear the entire wilderness. While many imitators leaned on gore, Just Before Dawn went for mood. It takes the rural terror of Friday the 13th and strips it down to raw tension. The story follows a group of hikers who venture into an isolated Oregon forest, only to encounter twin killers hiding among the trees. There's no loud music or snappy dialogue here. Just dread, silence, and the sound of nature watching back. What sets this apart is how real it feels. The camera captures mountains, waterfalls, and vast forests that swallow every character. The violence hits harder because the world feels alive and indifferent. By the time the final act arrives, the heroine's transformation is primal. She doesn't just survive, she becomes something fierce. It's one of the few slashers that manages to be beautiful and terrifying at once. By the late 1980s, the wave of Friday the 13th imitators had begun to feel tired. Many films tried to copy Jason's formula, but Offerings was among the last to do it openly while also adding a small twist. The story centers on a bullied boy who survives a traumatic accident, grows up in a mental institution, and eventually escapes to take revenge on the people who tormented him. The plot may sound familiar because it follows the same pattern as many slashers. A wronged individual returns to punish those connected to his past. Every scene, from the darkened streets to the stalking sequences, carries echoes of Jason's world. There's a slow build to tension. Night falls, characters feel isolated, and the audience anticipates a killer stepping out of the shadows. The small town setting, empty streets, and nighttime scenes give the film a grounded, almost ritualistic feel. By 1989, audiences no longer demanded originality. They wanted the familiar scare, the feeling of dread that Jason perfected in his first films. In this sense, Offerings succeeds. It delivers exactly what fans expect: suspense, isolation, and sudden, shocking attacks, even if the story feels borrowed. The murders are straightforward but effective, and the pacing keeps viewers on edge without unnecessary subplots. By the mid-2000s, fans had grown nostalgic for the classic 80s-style slasher. Hatchet arrived as both a tribute and a modern reboot of that style, updating the old camp massacre with sharper sound, bigger effects, and a more intense pace. The film takes place in the Louisiana swamps, where a group of tourists becomes trapped by Victor Crowley, a grotesque and deformed killer with incredible strength. Crowley's rampage is filled with extreme, practical gore, reminiscent of the brutal kills in Jason's early films, but amplified for modern audiences. Unlike most rip-offs, Hatchet is self-aware and confident. It celebrates its own excess rather than hiding it, leaning into the blood, the tension, and the suspense, with a clear understanding of what works in a slasher. Practical effects are spectacular, from dismemberment to close-up kills, creating a visceral impact that digital effects rarely match. Crowley himself is a hybrid. He has Jason's unstoppable rage and iconic terror, but combines it with a monstrous, almost Leatherface-style look. It doesn't try to disguise its roots. It proudly wears them. The film proves that the core slasher formula, isolated victims, a relentless killer, escalating body count, still resonates. Not every forest killer needs a mask. Wrong Turn adapts Jason's formula and fuses it with backwoods cannibal horror. A group of city teenagers becomes lost in the Appalachian wilderness and encounters a family of inbred mutants who live in total isolation. The setup mirrors Friday the 13th. Outsiders enter, communication fails, and the wilderness itself becomes a trap. However, the execution is more brutal and realistic. Unlike Jason, whose presence often feels unstoppable but almost supernatural, the killers in Wrong Turn are human predators. Every chase is desperate, and every attack carries personal stakes. The threat is tangible, grounded in survival rather than legend or myth. The film's editing is faster, the violence more immediate, and the pacing tight, creating a relentless tension from start to finish. While sequels eventually expanded the story with prequels and increasingly bizarre twists, the first Wrong Turn hits the same nerve Jason did in 1980. Strangers trapped in a hostile environment where no one can help them. Jason's influence never left. The Friday the 13th ripoffs are more than copies. They're echoes. Each one tries to capture that same feeling. The quiet before chaos, the glint of a blade in moonlight, the knowledge that something is coming and you can't stop it. Some succeed. Most fail. Which ripoff is your favorite? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to click like and subscribe for more horror breakdowns. Thanks for watching.